Welcome to Highway Herald, your roadmap to the latest in auto. When tariffs shift, the whole industry swerves. Just weeks ago, Trump doubled steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%, triggering a shockwave across North America. By August 1st, a new 35% tariff on Canadian goods deepened the rift. But Canada didn't flinch. Carney countered with clean tech steel exports and trade pivots. Detroit, now sputtering. Here's how this political standoff is reshaping the future of auto manufacturing. Number 5. From Washington's steel sledgehammer to factory floor chaos. What began as Trump's push to revive U.S. manufacturing quickly turned into a shockwave. By invoking Section 232, he doubled tariffs on imported steel and aluminum to 50%, citing Canada's alleged failure to curb fentanyl trafficking, a claim Prime Minister Carney dismissed as baseless. Markets responded instantly. U.S. steel prices spiked to $900 per ton, hammering Detroit's automakers. Ford, GM, and Stellantis, unprepared for the sudden cost surge, were forced to slow production. Ford's River Rouge plant idled stamping lines mid-July, and the S&P 500 dipped 0.75% in a single day, labeled Trump's tariff tumble. Canadian exports dried up. Rail shipments stalled. Catherine Cobden of the Canadian Steel Producers Association said U.S. demand vanished overnight. In Windsor, Ford worker Kristen Lawton described the mood as life-changing fear, with Michigan's unemployment rate climbing to 5.4%, the nation's highest. But while Detroit staggered under pressure, Canada was already moving to reclaim control of the narrative. Number 4. Carney's Counterstrike. Green steel meets geopolitics. If Trump landed a punch, Carney countered with a strategic haymaker. Within 48 hours of the U.S. tariff hike, Canada launched a $1 billion steel modernization plan. The focus, replacing coal-fired blast furnaces with cleaner electric arc and hydrogen-based systems, technologies tailor-made for CBAM, the EU's upcoming carbon border tax. But it wasn't just climate-focused, it was geopolitical. On July 16th, Ottawa imposed steep quotas on steel imports from non-FTA countries. Any volumes above 50% of 2024 levels now face a 50% tariff. Steel melted and poured in China, slapped with a flat 25% duty, regardless of where it ends up. The decisive move? Canada locked in its clean steel for national infrastructure, from pipelines to housing, turning its green-powered mills into tools of foreign policy. Europe took notice. With CBAM compliance looming in 2026, buyers in Antwerp, Busan, and Tokyo rushed to secure Canada's low-emission steel. Carney summed it up bluntly. This isn't about nationalism, it's about leverage. The trade clash had evolved, no longer just tariffs, but a clean tech race for industrial dominance. But back across the border, automakers were starting to buckle under pressure. If you've made it this far and love the kind of deep dives we do here on Highway Herald, make sure to hit that subscribe button. You'll stay plugged into every new twist in auto, trade, and tech. Number 3, U.S. automakers slide into the danger zone. South of the border, the toll was brutal. Ford CEO Jim Farley had already warned that a 50% tariff could gouge the company by $2.5 billion in 2025. And he wasn't exaggerating. At $900 per ton, Ford was eating six-figure costs every few minutes. Dealers scrambled. In Texas, California, and everywhere in between, MSRP on high-volume models jumped by $1,500 to $2,000. Reuters reported that Mexico-made vehicles were spiking by as much as 25%. Consumers weren't just feeling the pinch, they were canceling pre-orders. Beyond autos, the pain hit energy too. U.S. frackers lost access to Canadian oil-grade pipe. OCTG became a rare commodity as Ottawa prioritized its own infrastructure. Even pipeline giant Enbridge had to dip into backup stockpiles. Midstream projects delayed, independent contractors sidelined, and when U.S. senators crossed into Ottawa begging for relief, Carney held firm. Export quotas? Minimal. Loopholes? Closed. His stance: you want Canadian steel? Play by the new rules. And speaking of rules, Canada was rewriting them entirely. Number 2, Canada's steel realignment, redrawing the industrial blueprint. Canada has moved from supply chain sidekick to industrial strategist. Backed by Ontario Premier Doug Ford, Prime Minister Carney rolled out a bold Made in Canada policy mandating Canadian melted steel in all federally funded infrastructure: highways, housing, pipelines, and more. Provinces like Alberta and Saskatchewan joined in, requiring Ontario processed steel in all pipeline-related components. The shift signals a national pivot. Canada isn't just exporting, it's rebuilding. Meanwhile, the export map has been redrawn. Canadian steel shipments to the US dropped from 75% to 68% by mid-2025. The surplus has found new life in CBM-prepped markets like the EU, Japan, and India, where Canada's 93% emissions-free steel qualifies for green trade incentives. With this carbon passport, Canada now taps premium buyers eager to lock in compliant supply. Crucially, this maneuver hasn't violated USMCA. Over 90% of exports still qualify. But Ottawa is tightening access for lower-tier unprotected goods. In doing so, Carney isn't just retaliating. He's redrawing trade routes to bypass the US entirely. Still, for many factory workers, this realignment isn't just policy, it's personal. Number 1. When the shop floor shakes, the human cost of a trade war. Trade wars may begin in boardrooms, but the real fallout hits the factory floor. In Windsor, Ontario, Canada's Motor City, workers like Kristen Lawton are feeling the pressure firsthand. A fourth-generation Ford employee, Lawton says this crisis feels worse than past recessions. It feels like a collapse. With nearly 19% of Windsor's workforce tied to manufacturing, steel tariffs have sent shockwaves through the community, stalling parts shipments, idling assembly lines, and triggering layoffs. Auto work in Windsor isn't just a job, it's a family legacy. But rising costs and supply disruptions are threatening that legacy. Union leaders warn younger, less senior workers are most at risk. U.S. plants that rely on Canadian steel and engines are also facing furloughs, eroding cross-border labor ties. Trump's justification, linking tariffs to fentanyl trafficking, has baffled economists and fractured labor unity. Meanwhile, Ottawa is reorienting toward Asia and Europe, where low-emission steel commands premium prices. Canadian exports to the U.S. have already fallen 10% in a year. It's a major moment for policymakers on both sides to reflect on what's been gained and what's at risk. Verdict: outplayed or outpaced. The strategic checkmate in steel. This showdown was never just about tariffs. It was about trajectory. While Trump's strategy leaned on blunt force protectionism, Carney quietly built an industrial moat. He didn't shout, he outmaneuvered. Electrified mills, international CBAM compliance, and domestic-first infrastructure policies have turned Canada's steel industry from dependent to dominant. Now, U.S. automakers face a dangerous two-front challenge. They're short on materials and unprepared for Europe's carbon tolls. Canada's green steel glides through global checkpoints while Detroit idles behind a tariff wall it helped erect. And here's the twist. Ottawa never needed to retaliate tit for tat. It simply moved ahead. So, what's next for Detroit, for DC, and for the decades-long industrial ties between Canada and the US? We want to hear from you. Should the US stick to steel tariffs, or is it time to rethink its trade strategy? Has Canada successfully future-proofed its auto sector, or is this just a short-term win? Will clean tech steel become the new oil in global trade battles? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your take, especially if you work in auto, energy, or manufacturing. Don't forget to subscribe to Highway Herald to stay in the loop on all things auto, trade, and tech. Thanks for watching and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen. There's more exciting and informative content waiting for you.